The courthouse stood tall in the middle of the city, cold and serious, with gray walls that had seen many stories pass through its doors. Inside, the air felt heavy, as if every sound carried weight. People filled the benches, some waiting for their names to be called, others watching out of quiet curiosity. At the center of it all stood a man named Ben, calm and silent, his hands relaxed at his sides, his face showing no fear or anger. Ben wore simple clothes that did not draw attention. His shoes were old but clean. His posture was straight, not proud, not weak, just steady. Anyone looking at him might think he was just another man facing trouble. No one could see the years of discipline behind his eyes or the memories he carried without speaking. An officer named Ryan stood nearby, watching Ben closely. Ryan had a sharp jaw and a stiff stance. He believed authority meant control, and control meant showing strength. His eyes held judgment before facts. To him, Ben was already guilty of something, even if the papers said otherwise. As people shifted in their seats, the judge had not yet arrived. The room buzzed with low voices. Ben stood still, focused on nothing in particular, letting time pass. He had learned patience in places far from this room, where waiting could mean survival. Ryan stepped closer, his boots echoing softly against the floor. He watched Ben move slightly, only enough to ease the pressure in his legs. That small motion was enough for Ryan to act. Without warning, Ryan shoved his foot forward, striking Ben's leg with force. The sound was sharp. Ben dropped to one knee, his hand touching the floor to steady himself. A quiet gasp moved through the room like a wave. Some people looked away, others leaned forward in shock. Ben did not shout. He did not push back. He breathed in slowly and stood up again with control. Ryan spoke loudly, accusing Ben of stepping out of line. His voice was confident, certain that no one would challenge him. Ben remained silent, his eyes forward, his face calm. Inside him, a storm of memory passed, but it stayed locked behind discipline. In the front row sat a woman named Maria. Her hair was gray, her hands worn from years of work. She had raised Ben after his parents passed, teaching him values stronger than anger. When she saw him pushed down, her heart clenched, but she stayed still, knowing Ben's strength came from restraint. The judge entered moments later, bringing the room to order. Ryan returned to his position, satisfied, believing the moment had passed. The judge began reviewing cases, unaware of what had just happened. Ben stood quietly, waiting his turn, his breathing steady. As the minutes moved on, Ryan leaned closer to Ben again. He whispered words meant to shame and provoke. Ben felt the intent but did not react. He had faced worse voices in darker places. Words had never broken him. Maria watched closely, her eyes never leaving Ben. She remembered the boy who used to wake before sunrise to run, the young man who left home without explanation, the man who returned quieter than before. She trusted him now as she always had. When Ben's name was finally called, he stepped forward with calm steps. The judge looked down at him briefly, reading from the file. Questions were asked, and Ben answered when needed, his voice respectful and even. Ryan watched with a faint smile, sure that power stayed on his side. As the hearing continued, something inside Ben settled into clarity. He knew this moment. He had faced moments like it before, where choices mattered. He reached slowly into his pocket, careful not to alarm anyone. His hand closed around his phone. Ryan noticed and tensed, ready to act. The judge looked up, annoyed by the movement. Ben lifted the phone and placed it to his ear, his motion calm and controlled. He spoke softly, using few words, sharing his location and asking for assistance. The call ended quickly. Ben returned the phone to his pocket and stood still again. The room was quiet, uncertain. Ryan laughed under his breath, convinced it meant nothing. To him, it was just another empty move. But Ben knew better. He had never used that number lightly. It was not about power or fear. It was about truth and timing. The judge continued speaking, unaware of what was set in motion. People shifted in their seats again, whispering softly. Maria felt something change in the air, though she could not explain it. Ben stood tall, his eyes calm, his body relaxed. He waited, just as he always had, trusting that the truth did not need to shout to be heard. Outside the courthouse, traffic moved as usual, unaware of the quiet turning point unfolding inside. And within those gray walls, a simple phone call began to pull unseen forces closer, step by step, toward a moment that would change everything. The courtroom returned to its slow rhythm after Ben ended the call, but the feeling inside the room had changed. People shifted in their seats more often, and quiet whispers moved from one bench to another. Ben stood in the same place, calm and steady, as if nothing unusual had happened. Ryan leaned against the wall with his arms crossed, wearing a look of confidence. He believed the moment had passed, and that control was still in his hands. He glanced at Ben with a faint smile, certain that silence meant weakness. To Ryan, power always spoke louder than patience. The judge continued reading through papers, unaware that unseen steps were already moving closer. His voice echoed through the room, formal and distant. Ben listened carefully, answering only when asked, never adding extra words. His tone stayed respectful, his posture unchanged. Maria watched everything with sharp eyes. She noticed the way Ben breathed slowly, the way his shoulders stayed relaxed. She had seen fear before, and this was not it. What she saw now was focus. She folded her hands together and waited. Minutes passed, then more minutes followed. The air felt thicker, as if time itself had slowed. A man in the back row cleared his throat. A woman shifted her bag on the floor. Every small sound felt louder than it should. Ryan checked his watch and sighed. He believed the case would end like all the others. He believed nothing could surprise him anymore. He took a step closer to Ben again, invading his space without reason. Ben felt the movement but did not react. He kept his eyes forward, fixed on a spot beyond the judge. Years of training had taught him how to stay present while remaining distant. He did not need to look strong because he already was. The judge paused briefly, glancing toward the noise, then continued. His voice carried authority, but not awareness. He had not seen the earlier moment, and did not sense the quiet tension growing beneath the surface. Suddenly, the heavy doors at the back of the courtroom opened. The sound was slow and deliberate. Heads turned at once. The room grew silent in a way that felt different from before. 3 men stepped inside. Their movements were calm and purposeful. They wore dark uniforms with clean lines and steady posture. They did not rush or speak loudly. They walked as if they belonged there. The judge stopped mid-sentence. His eyes lifted from the papers, confusion crossing his face. Ryan straightened quickly, his arms falling to his sides. The faint smile disappeared from his face. The men walked down the aisle, their footsteps even and controlled. People watched without breathing, unsure of what they were seeing. Maria felt her heart begin to pound as she followed their movement. The lead man stopped near the judge's bench and spoke quietly. He handed over a small card. The judge leaned forward, reading it carefully. His expression changed, shifting from annoyance to surprise, then to seriousness. The courtroom stayed silent. No one whispered now. No one moved. Ryan swallowed and glanced around, suddenly aware of how small the room felt. The lead man turned slowly and looked toward Ben. He nodded once, a simple gesture filled with respect. Ben returned the nod, just as calmly. There was no pride in his face, only recognition. The judge cleared his throat and asked the men to explain their presence. The lead man spoke in a steady voice, explaining that Ben was not an ordinary man standing in court. He spoke of service, commitment, and years spent carrying responsibility without praise. The judge listened closely. His posture shifted as understanding settled in. He looked at Ben with new eyes, noticing the quiet strength he had missed before. Ryan felt heat rise in his face. His confidence drained away as reality pressed in. He stepped back without realizing it, his boots scraping softly against the floor. The lead man continued speaking, careful not to share more than needed. He explained that Ben rarely spoke about his past and never used it for advantage. He had only made the call because fairness mattered. Maria felt tears form in her eyes. She pressed her lips together, proud and relieved. She had always known who Ben was, even when the world did not. The judge thanked the men for coming and asked for a brief pause. He adjusted his glasses, his hands no longer steady. The weight of the moment had reached him. Ben stood quietly through it all. He did not look around. He did not search for reactions. He simply waited, trusting the process he had learned to respect. Ryan avoided looking at Ben now. His shoulders felt heavy. The authority he once felt secure in now seemed fragile. He understood, perhaps for the first time, that silence did not mean submission. The courtroom felt different now, filled with a quiet respect that could not be forced. The walls had not changed, but the truth inside them had risen to the surface. As the judge prepared to speak again, everyone in the room sensed that nothing would continue the same way. The unseen forces Ben had called were no longer distant. They were here. The judge leaned forward in his chair, feeling the weight of the moment settle over the courtroom. His voice sounded slower now, more careful, as he asked Ben to step closer. Ben obeyed without hesitation, walking forward with calm steps and steady balance. No one blocked his path this time. Ryan stood frozen near the wall, his eyes lowered, his confidence gone. The room watched Ben move, noticing the quiet strength in his posture, the discipline in each step. When Ben reached the front, he stopped and waited. He did not speak first. He had learned long ago that patience often spoke louder than explanation. The judge looked at him closely, seeing details he had missed before. The lead man stepped forward again and spoke with calm clarity. He explained that Ben had served in places where silence was survival and control was life. He spoke of long nights, strict discipline, and responsibility carried without recognition. The courtroom listened without interruption. Every word felt heavy but controlled. No details were dramatic, yet every sentence carried truth. Maria held her breath as she listened. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from emotion she had carried for years. She remembered the day Ben left home with a small bag and returned years later with quieter eyes. The judge nodded slowly, understanding growing in his expression. He asked Ben if he wished to say anything. The room waited, expecting explanation or defense. Ben spoke only once. His voice was calm and respectful. He said he did not ask for special treatment, only fairness and dignity like anyone else. His words were simple, but they settled deep into the room. The judge felt a shift inside himself. He realized how easily power could blind fairness. He looked toward Ryan, who now stood stiff and silent. The judge asked Ryan to explain his actions earlier. Ryan cleared his throat, struggling to find words. His voice lacked the certainty it once had. He spoke of rules and order, but his explanation felt thin. The lead man did not interrupt. He only listened. The room could sense the imbalance between intention and action. Ryan avoided eye contact. His shoulders sank slightly. He realized the room no longer stood with him. Authority without fairness had left him exposed. The judge raised a hand, stopping further words. He announced a temporary pause in the hearing to address what had occurred. His voice carried seriousness now, not routine. Ryan was asked to step aside. The request was calm but firm. Ryan obeyed slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. His badge no longer felt like protection. Ben returned to his place without being asked. He stood where he had been before, calm and grounded. He did not look toward Ryan. He did not seek reaction from the crowd. The courtroom filled with a different kind of silence. It was not tense anymore. It was reflective. People shifted in their seats, processing what they had witnessed. Maria wiped her eyes quietly. She felt pride mixed with relief. She knew Ben would never speak of this moment again, even if others did. The judge reviewed the case file again, now with new awareness. He noticed details that had been ignored earlier. He questioned assumptions he had made too quickly. The lead man stepped back, his role complete. He stood quietly near the wall, watching without judgment. His presence remained steady. Ben waited, just as he always had. Waiting had never frightened him. He trusted time more than noise. Ryan stood apart from the others now, alone with his thoughts. He felt the weight of his actions press down on him. For the first time, he understood that power demanded responsibility. The judge spoke again, his voice firm and clear. He stated that the incident earlier would be formally reviewed. His words carried authority rooted in fairness, not control. The courtroom reacted softly. No one cheered. No one argued. Respect filled the space instead. Ben felt nothing but calm. The outcome did not define him. His character had already been shaped elsewhere. The judge thanked the lead man and his companions for their presence. He acknowledged the importance of truth and restraint. His eyes returned to Ben with quiet respect. As the hearing continued, the focus had shifted. Ben was no longer seen through judgment, but through understanding. The room felt lighter, though serious. Ryan remained silent, watching from the side. His certainty had been replaced by reflection. He knew this moment would follow him long after the day ended. Maria sat back, breathing deeply. She felt years of worry loosen their grip. She trusted that whatever came next, Ben would face it with the same strength. The courtroom walls stood unchanged, but the story inside them had turned. What began with judgment had moved toward truth. Ben stood steady, unshaken, knowing the hardest battles were never fought with fists or words. They were fought with restraint. And this one was not over yet. The judge took a deep breath before continuing, feeling the responsibility of the moment rest heavily on his shoulders. He adjusted his papers but did not read from them right away. He looked across the courtroom, letting silence do its work. Ben stood calmly in his place, his hands relaxed, his face steady. He did not feel relief or pride. He felt only readiness for whatever came next. The judge spoke clearly, stating that after reviewing the facts and the situation, Ben would not face further action in this matter. His words were firm and final. A quiet wave of relief moved through the room. Maria closed her eyes for a moment, letting the tension leave her body. She pressed her hands together and whispered a silent thanks. Years of worry felt lighter in that instant. Ben listened without reacting. He had learned that outcomes were temporary, but character was permanent. He accepted the decision with a small nod and nothing more. The judge then addressed the earlier incident directly. He stated that what had happened would be reviewed through proper channels. His voice carried seriousness and resolve. Fairness would not be ignored. Ryan stood still, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the floor. He understood now that actions left marks that could not be erased easily. The room no longer supported him. The lead man stepped forward one final time and thanked the judge for handling the situation with care. His tone was respectful and calm. He spoke briefly and stepped back. The judge acknowledged him with a nod. He then declared the session concluded. The sound of the gavel marked the end of the hearing. People began to rise from their seats slowly. Some glanced at Ben with new understanding. Others simply walked away quietly, carrying the moment with them. Ben turned and walked toward the exit at an even pace. No one blocked his way. No one spoke to him. The path felt clear. Maria stood and waited near the aisle. When Ben reached her, she smiled softly. She did not speak. She did not need to. They walked out together into the open air. The sun felt warmer than before. The city sounds returned, alive and moving. Outside the courthouse, the lead man waited near a car. He shook Ben's hand firmly. There were no long words. Respect passed between them without sound. Ben thanked him with a nod. He knew their paths would likely never cross again. That was how such connections often worked. Ryan remained inside, watching from a distance as the room emptied. He felt the weight of reflection settle in. The moment would stay with him long after the day ended. Ben and Maria walked down the steps together. She looked at him with pride that came from knowing the truth long before others saw it. He walked with quiet strength, unchanged by attention. They reached the sidewalk and paused. Traffic moved past them, unaware of the story that had unfolded inside. Life continued, as it always did. Maria asked Ben if he was ready to go home. He answered yes in a calm voice. They began walking side by side. As they moved forward, Ben felt peace settle in. Not because he had been proven right, but because he had stayed true to himself. That mattered more than recognition. The courthouse stood behind them, tall and silent. It would see many more cases. Most would be forgotten. This one would remain. Not because of power or drama, but because restraint had spoken louder than force. Because truth had arrived quietly and changed the direction of the room. Ben walked on, carrying his past without letting it define his future. He had always done his duty. He would continue to do so, even in silence. The call that day had changed the moment, but not the man. He remained steady, grounded, and whole. And as the city swallowed the sound of their footsteps, the story closed not with noise, but with dignity.